This is Identity at the Center.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad yourself?
Doing great, man. I'm so excited for this episode. There are a couple of hot trends in the identity space right now. Continuous identity that we're going to talk about today is one that I really believe in. I'm really excited to talk about, and I'm just excited to jump into things.
Yeah, so today we've got a sponsor spotlight episode. We do these from time to time. It's a fully sponsored episode, so we get into the mindsets of our sponsors and sort of the big thinkers they've got on their side, get their perspectives on IAM market straight from the source, which is a little bit different than our normal episodes where we try to be as vendor neutral as possible, right? Not talk product, but that is not one of these. Today, we're actually going to talk product. And the product today we're going to talk with is Signal. And for those not familiar, you can find them on the web. SGNL.ai/IDAC will take you to there. I know it's like a lot of letters, but it's Signal. And for that, we've got Erik Gustavson. He's the co-founder and CPO at Signal. Welcome to Identity at the Center, Erik.
Hey, well, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. So I'm joking a little bit because it's like SGNL.ai/IDAC, and yet somehow people will know that is Signal and Identity at the Center, which is amazing.
Yeah, brains are amazing.
So this is your first time being with us. I always like to find out how people got in the identity space. It's such a varied kind of skill set and background. So let's start there, Erik. How did you get into the IAM space? Is it something that you chose or did it choose you?
You know, in some ways, I'd say it was both. Back, 2011, my current co-founder, Scott, and I were running identity and product at of all things, a fantasy sports gaming company. We built games for the NBA. We were B2B, so we built and operated the games under somebody else's brand. So we did things like NBA's games, World Cup games. We did NASCAR's game. We did some TV shows like The Bachelorette. It was a lot of fun. We were using all SaaS products. Basically, people weren't even using that term at that point. You had the Salesforces of the world; they existed, and at that point, we were just hired guns there. We were employees, and the company was being sold off, and we were there to help transition it over. We got done with that, and we're looking around, going, "Well, what do we want to work on next? Let's go start a company. What's a problem we can solve?" And we kind of realized, hey, everything we're using is cloud-based. We have this whole IT department. They use Active Directory. We've got Exchange. It's all running on our own hardware that's in some data center. We're managing it all. And that group has no clue about any of the web things we're doing. Like, they don't know how people get access to them. They don't know how to remove people. We were, obviously transitioning the company to someone else. You're removing access to things. So we said, how are people going to solve this problem with these web applications? There's going to be a million of them, which at that point wasn't the most popular consensus. I got laughed at a few times for suggesting that. It's like, oh no, it's all going to be just Salesforce. They're going to own everything. It's like, there's no barrier to entry to make a web application. And so we started looking around and we ran across this little startup called Okta. And we looked at Okta, we're like, this is kind of what they do, but it seems really tied into Active Directory. I'm not sure about this. Like, we could do a better job. And so, they were 2 years into it or so. We said, let's go raise some money. Let's start a company. We called that was called Bidium. And we built an identity platform. We didn't actually even know much about identity at that time. We were mostly focused on credential vaulting, what became that. But we built in all the typical things: single sign-on, SAML, OpenID Connect, directory sync, provisioning, all that stuff. And we did that for about 6 years. So we kind of stumbled into it, but I guess of our own volition, because we were going down this path of starting this company. Sort of fast forward, that brings us to 2017. We were fully competing with Okta. We were winning deals. I think we won like Bank of America against them and Liberty Mutual, and they filed to go public. We're like, oh man, what's this going to mean for us? Like, what happens? We're a lot smaller than they are. Now they're going to be a public company. Like, are we going to be able to compete? And that actually catalyzed the entire industry to go, hey, this identity thing seems real. It's now a public company that's an identity provider. And every one of the partners we had, so we took a very cloud forward approach to things. We weren't trying to tie back to traditional LDAP systems. We were looking at HR systems. We were looking at SCIM. We were looking at Google Cloud as identity sources to allow you to authenticate. And so these partners all reached out to us, and we actually ended up selling the company to Google, and that became part of Google Cloud Identity, which is their single sign-on, provisioning, directory sync product. And I ran a big chunk of the single sign-on portion, directory sync, for about 2 years at Google, as Scott came along too, and worked a bunch of interesting things. So that's kind of how I got in the identity space, I guess. Prior to that, I was just doing software, various kind of enterprise software, and it made sense to us, and been on that journey ever since.
So as a recovering fantasy football player, I don't know if I should be shaking your hand or trying to tear it off because I've had good and bad seasons, but I won't go there with this one. I introduced you as a CPO, and that's a Chief Product Officer. Right. Tell me about that role. What is a CPO? And tell me a little bit like, what is a normal day? And maybe it's a normal week or average week, whatever you want to portray it as.
So at Signal, what I do as the Chief Product Officer is I oversee both the engineering team and the product team. So I have very solid product lead and engineering lead underneath me, and they take care of their respective teams, make sure things get built, make sure our product's released, talk to customers, be happy. My job is really actually, the way I formulate it, is to talk to a lot of customers. I try to talk to as many customers during the week as possible. I try to go along on sales calls. I try to talk to customers that have been deployed. What are their problems? And I'm trying to kind of see around the corner, like what's coming next. Like when someone says something interesting, or customer A says, hey, I want this I'm trying to solve these problems, and customer B will probably tell me they're trying to solve completely different problems, but I realize there's some Venn diagram overlap between those things. I'm like, okay, my ears will perk up, and I'll bring that back to the team, and we'll work on, okay, how do we develop that? How do we turn that into product roadmap and product features? So I think my job is to listen as much as possible to the market, reflect that back internally, and then take what the teams are coming up with too, and bring that out and say, hey, what do you think, customer X? What do you think of this sort of thing? If we built something like this, is this interesting? And then for pre-sales to customers we're not working with yet, so prospects, I guess, see if it fits them. Where are they on their journey in the identity space? What we're building at Signal is pretty new. And so there's a lot of education in the market. There's definitely people out there who are way more advanced than we are in their thinking, and they're like, yes, this is what we've been looking for. But there's also a lot that are like, what does Signal do? Wait, isn't that some messaging app? Like, what do you guys do?
So I want to start up with, how did you get the company name together there? SGNL, Signal, how did you come up with that?
So as we're thinking through this, what we're now calling continuous identity, back in just probably mid-2021, we were about to leave Google. Scott and I were sitting down, we're like, hey, what do we want to call this company? And we started thinking about, this is broadly in the authorization space. We're post-login, so we're not dealing with who the user is. We're not that part of identity. We're what can the user do now, once we know who they are, that side of identity. And a lot of what we thought about was, this is a game of what signals can you get in from existing systems? Can you get threat intelligence? Can you get signals from directories? Like thinking about this big way of meshing the data together that's already living in the enterprise and pulling it into a sort of what we now call a fabric, like bringing all those relationships together to be able to understand what are people allowed to be doing at this moment in time. And so we knew we wanted to use the word signal somewhere in the name. So we spent probably 2 weeks just texting random names back and forth to each other. Like, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And we'd then go look to see if the domain name is available. So eventually we came up with hey, if we take the word signal, I think I came up with this, and remove the vowels from it. That's a nice short domain name. SGNL.com, somebody's got that and squatting on it. .ai, let's do that. And this was pre-OpenAI. There wasn't ChatGPT at this point. And coming from Google DNA, we're like, okay, machine learning, AI stuff, that's a thing. And eventually, we want to bring some of that into this system. So yeah, let's go with SGNL.ai. That kind of encapsulates it. Some point later, one of our customers pointed out to me, do you realize that you just took the vowels out of the word signal and moved them to the dot after the dot? I'm like, yes, I'm really brilliant. No, I did not realize that.
Yes, of course. Yes, we
Of
planned
course.
that all along.
It's an anagram. Don't you get it?
Yeah. We should also say head of marketing then. I don't know. You probably have one of those, and I don't want
We
to
do.
steal from that person. So, usually, Eric, or I should say, always, when somebody has an idea for a company, a solution, it's a solution to a problem. So, what is the problem that you guys are solving?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of this has some roots inside when we were together at Google. So Scott and I were both there. After we came in 2 years of stabilizing the acquisition, Scott took a role inside Google to look at how do you deal with authorization across the entire platform. So this is everything from like Waymo to Google Maps to Ads to Nest, every subsidiary that Google owns. How do you deal with policy across the board on that? And I was spending a lot of time with who's now our CTO, Atul, and he was wanting to propose this thing that is now we call CAPE, Continuous Access Evaluation Profile. And he wrote a blog on that. I actually was the guy who approved the blog being published in 2019. His manager came to me and said, "Does this make sense?" I'm like, "Yep, that is brilliant. I want to talk to this Atul guy." And so we were thinking about these problems. Specifically what Scott, the pain point Scott was being asked to solve is Google has, they've got a couple engineers. They can do some stuff over there. And they've built for themselves pretty much every possible type of security and identity technology and probably own licensing to like all the other ones anyway. But they ran into this issue where, for geopolitical reasons, they wanted to lock down user access in Hong Kong. And they wanted to lock it down so that only customer data for customers that were located, their headquarters were in Hong Kong, could be accessed by employees who were assigned to work in, they had a very big building in Hong Kong at the time. They probably still do. There are a lot of engineering teams from different parts of the company working in that building. And so how do you actually do that? And it sounds like a simple problem, but it actually gets complicated. It's like, how do you know the customer's based there? How do you know that's the headquarters? How do you know the user is not just like passing through temporarily in an office, they don't actually work there. So you have to pull all these data feeds in to be able to solve those kinds of problems. And it wasn't something that could be done quickly. And obviously, geopolitics doesn't move fast, but it does move, in weeks, not in years. And so realize, hey, this is probably a blind spot to our systems that we can't do policy fast. How do we solve that? Hey, Scott, you seem like the delusional entrepreneurial type of guy. Can you solve this? And so he went off and they built this platform for like 2 years or so. And when he got done with it, I was comparing notes with him because I had been always kind of interested in the post authentication, the post login problem. Like, how do you know what people are supposed to do right now? Atul is obviously interested in this too, with CAPE being focused on session transitions. And so we were comparing notes and like, that seems like a really good problem to solve. It doesn't seem like there's, but is this just something like you have to be Google or you have to be Amazon to have these is this that big of a scale issue, or do sort of mere mortal enterprises actually have this problem? So we went out, we talked to some CISOs at large companies like, what are you all doing? And the answer we got back from them was like, there's nothing good in the space that does this for us. We were probably going to assemble a team of people together and do this ourselves. That's enough. We were at the time where we had to sort of stick around at Google. So like, hey, let's quit our jobs next week and let's go found a company. Let's get the band back together. So that's what we did.
So many questions based on what you said. And I'm going to stick with the one that we entered the show with and talked about, this term, continuous identity. I mean, it has so much meaning to me, and it's something that's been, needed for such a long time. But I want to give you an opportunity to put in your words, what is meant by continuous identity? What is the dream behind that?
Yeah, it's a great question. For continuous identity, and I'm really glad the market's starting to, customers are starting to use this terminology. I heard it a lot at Identiverse this year. I've heard it come up in just natural conversations now because it hasn't had a name. In some ways, I think of it, if you think of the kind of asynchronous, always on, sharing first architecture that something like CAPE and the shared signals framework envisions being there, continuous identity is kind of that solution. Continuous identity is the idea that you should be always pulling in signals and information from your systems, and then you should be evaluating that in real time whenever a user is doing something. And on top of that, you should be broadcasting it back out so everybody knows about it. All the other systems know about it. So really simple example is, and I guess I should add, time is important to this, right? The time factor. And we often don't think about time when we think about identity policies. We usually think in terms of more what I call static access, like I can do a thing. But now really you want to ask, like, I can do a thing right now. So imagine you're DevOps and you're supposed to go out, today's the day I'm supposed to go to AWS and I'm supposed to do a DNS update to deploy some new system into production. Or maybe I'm supposed to do it in staging it better. And I go there and I have access. And now as soon as I get into that environment, I realize like, hey, I'm waiting for something to happen. I click a link and I've got malware on my device. I still have that session open. That malware might be harvesting those credentials, getting me in there. There's systems, CrowdStrike does a great job of detecting those sorts of things, but how does CrowdStrike tell my IDP to tell AWS that it should cut me off? Or let's say I'm actually not supposed to be in staging, making this change, the prep for next week's production release, and I accidentally clicked on the tile for production. And now because I am the guy who deploys to production and I'm in production, I make this change too, and I break things. All these problems have to do with standing access and a problem of not sharing information. So you think of continuous identity as, hey, we pull the data in real time from systems. We react to that changing state. You were okay from a CrowdStrike point of view. You're no longer okay now from a CrowdStrike point of view, or you're on call this week, you're not on call this week, or you're supposed to be the tickets for staging in ServiceNow, the tickets for production in ServiceNow. These are all state changes. And when that state, or better, I think for a less nerdy way of saying that is, think about context. The context of me doing my job, that changes. Our identity system should react to that. This is a really common concept in the kind of cybersecurity land, where you have threat detection and automation and SOARs and SIMs and all these tools. How do you bring that into the identity play? And then how do you have the identity inform the security side? We've been treating these two industries as separate for a really long time, and I see them really kind of converging.
Yeah, I mean, the podcast name, Identity at the Center, has been all about the story that you just relayed there. I think a lot of people think, okay, well, identity is the new perimeter. Identity at the center is kind of a play on that, but it's really that the identity and what's happening in all these systems kind of comes back to the center and drives things. Because you made a great point there about, okay, CrowdStrike detects this. Does that information just kind of die there? Or does that become identity data that comes back to the center? And I think where we're going with this is that then that data becomes usable for making smart identity decisions, and not only just making smart decisions or throwing information on a dashboard, but in real time saying, this is a session that looks like it's from an identity that's been compromised over here. Let's do something about it. Let's temporarily shut off access, for example. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Exactly. It's that idea of and I like to think about it as that identity comes from the perimeters back to the center and then is processed, mixed with other information from other systems, and then rebroadcast back out. So not only are you getting all these superpowers of, I can do things in real time, I can take all this rich information that we already have inside the company, and I can make better use of it, but you actually make all your other products better too. Because suddenly your, let's call it your Okta instance or your Entra instance, is suddenly a lot smarter because now it's getting data feeds piped into it from your CrowdStrike solutions. And CrowdStrike's smarter because it sees somebody's probing at the IDP, and it can bring that stuff back into CrowdStrike or bring it to a SOAR. And you can run a playbook against that, saying, hey, well, if Jim's keeps hitting the thing that says deny repetitively, maybe that's not Jim doing that.
That's right. Yeah. And by the way, so what you said there with identity is at the perimeter, comes back to the center, that goes back out to the perimeter. We thought of that as a podcast name, but we decided just to go with identity at the center.
It's a little
But
long, yeah.
it's a little long. It's hard to search for. But yeah, kind of what I wanted to get at is something that I think you're talking about. And for me, this has been one of my big questions about Signal is what are the systems that you want to collect this data from? You mentioned CrowdStrike. Give us some more examples.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's probably three big categories of data. I'd say there's traditional identity data. So think your directories, your HR systems, your groups, policy information. That's all identity data. There's security data. So your CrowdStrikes, I'd say your device compliance data. If you have a device management platform, if you like a Jamf or an Intune, that's the security feeds. Maybe you've got other sources of data, other types of telemetry that you've wired up in the enterprise. Maybe you've got VPN logs or something if you're still using that type of topology. And then you've got your operational data. This is your tickets, your ServiceNow, your PagerDuty. Hey, I'm on call this week. I'm the guy who's supposed to be going in there. If I'm not on call, well, I shouldn't be able to get access to things. Or if I'm on vacation, unless I'm working for that kind of company where I should be dialing in from Hawaii to do my work, mostly I probably shouldn't have access because if I'm coming in and Workday says I'm actually out of office right now, without any other information, you should probably assume that I'm an attacker, that I'm not actually me, that somehow I've been compromised. Or if I'm suddenly coming from strange IP address I've never shown up before in a browser you've never seen. So it's that type of business telemetry. And all of these things exist in the enterprise. We just stick them in silos and don't ever talk to them again.
So that concept of silos leads me to a very interesting question, I think, is the concept of data. Mm-hmm. Is stale data better than no data? Or is no data better than stale data? I can't even say it correctly. But the better or stale data or no data, like what is the thought process behind that?
I think I usually try to flip this around when customers bring this up. And I say, let's start with the policy instead. What are you trying to accomplish? And how, if you had write that down, literally write it down on a piece of paper. I only want on-call engineers who have a ticket assigned to them to go to a production system. That's the most basic policy a company's going to have that gets them in trouble. I think no one thinks their cloud systems are the most secure they could be. In that scenario, how would you go about proving that? Forget real time, forget non-real time. Actually, literally, if your job was to go check out if Jeff's allowed to be in this system right now by manually checking things, what systems would you go to? Okay, I need to know about tickets. Where would I go? ServiceNow. I have some data there. Do I need all the data to be perfect over in ServiceNow? No, I need some basic ticket information available to me. Maybe I need a process that I actually open tickets, but if that's your policy, I hope you're following your policy or else you've got different problems. Do I need to go look at device compliance? Yes. Okay. Should people be in the production system if they're on their old unpatched Windows 2000 laptop that's sitting in their garage? No, I probably want them to be on a company managed machine if I'm letting them do really serious things. So I'd say you need some data. You need to have a good handle on your data, probably more than you need to have good data. Knowledge of data is probably the number one thing. Just where are the systems? You can paper over quite a bit by taking data from multiple systems and then organizing it. And Signal helps you kind of stitch it all together. And that creates a lot of power for you. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't all need to be pristine. But if you know the different systems that you'd use to enforce your policy, if you can put your hands on that manually, then you can start. And I think that's a better position than just saying, oh, it's all in these silos and I don't know. I'm not even going to go after it. I'm not even going to try.
So, Erik, it seems to me what you're talking about here is that most of the Signal data that you get the most value from is from your own IT systems, whether they're SaaS systems. So what about getting data from big IDPs like a Facebook or something like that? Does that make any sense? Do you ever see a future where it's you're getting this from a broker? In other words, you're plugging into some kind of central broker data hub, or does that just go against what you're trying to achieve?
I like to be more agnostic about where the data might come from. I think the low hanging fruit is your internal systems, but it's a sibling standard to CAPE is RISC, which is for account takeover feeds. And Google publishes one, and the US government publishes one for account takeovers. That's reasonable if you're dealing with consumer identities. That might be handy to grab that data feed and use that in your policies. There's lots of sources of IP reputation data, threat signatures. There's lots of vendors of that information. And so I think for the enterprise use case or the second party, like the contractors, vendors use cases, your internal systems are great for that. For consumer use cases, which we're starting to see some of our customers tiptoe towards building those sorts of things, yeah, there might be good public sets. Mixing it all together, though, is the real power comes from, because the more you layer into the system, the more you map out the connectivity, this gets exponentially more powerful for you. You have a lot more capabilities as you start to expand the network of data that's coming into this. We think of it, we call it the identity data fabric. It's stitching, you've got to weave all those threads in together. So I'd say, yeah, I can see a world where there's going to be public feeds. I don't necessarily think I'd see a world where that's the only source of feeds. Companies are always going to have their internal systems. They're going to have their homegrown things, and they're going to want to use those for their own business reasons.
I love that answer. So one more, which is, around kind of who's Signal's built for? Is it built for, who's going to use it? I love the answer if it would be IAM practitioner. I also think the role of the IAM practitioner is expanding, but where in the organization do you see folks getting excited about this and kind of reaching out to you and, being interested in the product and potentially buying on?
I'll make your day. It's the identity practitioners. It's really the IAM architects that we see. We deliberately designed Signal, though, to handle two different personas in the organization. So the identity practitioner is the main operator. The architect, they manage the system. They define, we call them policy snippets inside the system. Think of them as like they're the nouns. They're the Lego building blocks that we use to assemble how Signal operates inside your company. Because we want to do that because they understand the identity principles that the enterprise wants to put in place. But then we give an interface where a business analyst or someone who's closer to the application we're trying to protect, we refer to that as a protected system. That persona, they should get a very simplified, not simplistic, but easy to use way to say, here's what I want to do. And do that by taking those Lego blocks and then snapping them together. If you're familiar with Mad Libs, it's kind of like Mad Libs. Like there's just the policy, and let me throw in who's the principal, what are the actions, what are the assets they're trying to protect here, and what are some conditions. Those are all pre-canned. My local identity architect has already come up with those based on the data sets we've pulled into Signal, and I just need to put them together and layer that. Hey, now I have a policy, and let me go stack up a couple of policies. We really want to think about reuse. So I want that policy, like I can go to the cloud if I have a ticket and my device and I'm not on a compromised device. That should apply if I'm multi-cloud. They're literally the same policy. We shouldn't care about, GCP uses a different identifier from Azure, uses a different identifier from AWS, or even if I've got a couple different IDPs in the mix, which is really common. The person who's trying to put that policy in place shouldn't have to worry about those details. Let this graph, let this fabric handle that. Let it do the on the fly translation. And that's so the architect role defines the terms of use in a way, and the business analyst or the end person who's after maintain their job is to maintain a system. That person is also a persona in Signal. So we usually come in and talk to the architects first. They're kind of like the hero of the journey. And then they bring it to their internal teams who rely on them to get things done.
You're pushing all my buttons in the right way when you start mentioning things like Lego and Mad Libs and things like that. I think right or wrong, the industry likes to put things into a box. And so we already have boxes like IGA, PAM, KIM, and a whole bunch of other ones that, would take forever to kind of list off. Where does Signal fit into that ecosystem? Is this a new category, or is this creating something new? Does it complement things that already exist? Tell me a little about like where you see Signal fitting into the ecosystem.
Sure. In some ways, it's a bit of all the above. We do complement. So we go into companies, they already own everything. They probably already own 3 or 4 versions of everything. Like I've got Okta, Ping, Entra running around. I've got Division over here that uses Curity. I've got SailPoint from this thing, and this acquisition we made, they're on Savient. I've got CyberArk. So we work with all those systems. We stitch them together and we make them all better. I'd say the way I really think about it is a new way of looking at the identity stack. And so there's some parts of IGA in here in terms of the ability to deal with users and groups. Like a lot of times when you're trying to solve this with an IGA hat on, you go make more roles, you make more groups, but really you're trying to emulate policies but you're doing it statically. And that eventually gets to this problem where you have like 3.3 groups per every user or employee of your company, and your Sarbanes-Oxley quarterly access reviews start exploding because you just have way too many things for all your managers to review. Or you might approach it with a privileged access management lens and go, all right, well, yeah, this is I need to step up. I need a special token to go and do something. That technology is very based on credentials. It's passwords you're checking in and out. Yeah, they might be piped through something, but it's inherently different from the single sign-on workforce identity world that we live in 2025. So we pull some aspects of PAM, we pull some aspects of IGA together, but I really argue like we wouldn't build identity solutions the way they're built right now. Like these things came up over time. PAM arose pre-cloud. This is like, how do I deal with my Cisco routers and root passwords on Linux boxes? Not even thinking about single sign-on at that point. IGA, that came out of Sarbanes-Oxley. Like we're in this sort of generational change. Like these technologies and techniques have been around like 25 plus years. It's kind of time to rethink how we're doing stuff because we build this massive identity edifice, and yet we still have problems. We still get hacked. We still get breached. Like we're not doing like everything's 100%. There's never going to be 100%. But we're clearly not doing something right in the identity space if we can't even keep use it as a basic security tool for us. So I do think this is a new way of looking at the problem. I don't want to have the hubris that a startup can define a brand new category and be like, ta-da, here's the silver bullet, magic beans. But I do see we're reflecting the trend of where the industry is starting to go in terms of thinking about these problems, and we want to help with that. But we will play nice with the existing stack. We don't come in and say, hey, yeah, like we don't coexist with these things. No, we coexist with everything. Like that's actually part of it's a nice aspect of the way the system works, and the way it works best is when it integrates everything together. That has a nice property of we'll work with what you have too.
So there is, the reason I bring this up is because I know we have all these different acronyms, and one of the ones that's kind of newer, at least to me, is this idea of authorization. And Gartner has a term for Authorization Management Platform, or AMP. At the same time, we're seeing things like PBAC, policy-based access controls, kind of rearing its head up again as people try to solve for, RBAC just stinks. It just takes forever to get it right, and it's outdated as soon as you press, submit. So where do you see, the industry going, but also how does Signal like align with things like AMP or PBAC or star.back, whatever acronym you want or letter you want to put in front of the access control?
So I say we're pretty aligned with this idea of AMP. Like I really like when it was Paul Mazzaro who wrote that. If you have a Gartner subscription, I highly recommend giving it a read. It's going in the right direction. If you talk to Paul himself, this is evolving still. This is the first foray into trying to define this movement that's happening in the identity space. It hits on a lot of things that really resonate with me and with Signal. So I asked like Paul, like, hey, how do you differentiate this from what's come before? And it's this orchestration layer. And that's where the CAPE side of things, that's where the signals, the emitting of signals, we send information from the edge to the center and send it back. That's the orchestration portion of this. You need policy. on top of that because you need the rules of the road. How am I steering my car, or how am I steering my ship? Pick your analogy. That has to be part of it. And then you need the data fabric underneath it. And those are the three main legs of the signal stool: policy engine, orchestration layer, which looks a lot like policy, but you think a little bit more asynchronously with the orchestration. And then the fabric that powers both of them, which is the aggregation of the data you want to back up all your policies. And we call them triggers in the orchestration tool. All those things kind of come into play here for us. And so, PBAC's an interesting term. I think there's lots of really solid PBAC tools out there. But historically, like if you think back to like a XACML days, like 25 something years ago, if you can remember that long ago, those are kind of meant to be more developer tools. Like I just want to build a better framework within my application for dealing with these problems. And what we've seen is a lot of customers who are not successful trying to apply those concepts horizontally inside their enterprise. If you try to take a classic, XACML tool, or if you get to like alpha and stop having to deal with XML and you can use JSON, it is 2025 now. It's still difficult because they weren't designed to think about the enterprise state. You need to have these things all work in concert, but you need that backbone saying like, this is what I'm trying to apply horizontally across the board, not down into the application. So, when you all were asking about personas, like I did not talk about developers. Like we're not a developer-focused tool. I think there are great PBAC tools out there like OPA that are good for a developer wanting to do something better than hard coding authorization logic into the system. But as soon as you need data that's not resident to that application, who's on vacation, unless you're building an application to manage the vacation schedule, you want to get that from somewhere else. And you don't want to deal with the stale data problem of that. And how do I synchronize that information? And maybe some of that's sensitive. Like, obviously vacations might not be that sensitive, but think of something like it's a legitimate policy. Citizenship might come into play. Maybe I have to be a certain citizenship to see some piece of government data that's a very common regulatory policy, difficult to enforce. And I don't think we want to be pushing what citizenship my employees are to every single one of the applications in the enterprise. I'm sure that'll get you in trouble in Europe, if not in the US, to do those sorts of things. So PBAC tools are interesting, and I think they're a useful part of the system, but it doesn't solve this problem. And I think AMP's on the right direction. As we start seeing the space emerge and these architectures get real mileage in the space and more adoption, I think that will also evolve a little bit too. But it's promising.
So Erik, I want to go back to what you were talking about with the identity architects. So the ones that pull you in, they want to and I realize like making the case to those folks is no easy task because they need to really understand this. So at that point that you achieve, like, okay, they get it, they buy in. I'm thinking of like some really smart people who could probably do both sides of this equation. So, I'm thinking of Sean O'Dell, thinking of Andrew Cameron. First, you have to sell them on the tech, right? Mm-hmm. After that, these are guys who can speak the language of business to make the case. I'm wondering, what does that sound like? Help us out for the people who are listening who are like excited about this and maybe want to dig into the tech. That's great. Eventually you get them sold on that. Now you have to explain it to somebody who's nothing about the tech and probably doesn't care. And you have to put it in the language of business. So
yep.
How do they do that? How are they successful?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of like, what does it look like to win in a company when we go into it? And this is where I usually start with something. I think Ian Glazer put this on a blog of his called we endearingly inside of Signal call it the pyramid of pain, which is if you think of all the applications in your company that you're using, which ones are you the most worried about? Like, where is the biggest problem going to be? Start there. That's the top of the pyramid. That's the most painful thing. And those are usually applications that you're not in it every minute of the day. It's not Slack or email or your calendar. It's your production environments, your production systems, maybe your financial systems, Maybe it's your CI/CD pipelines, the things that are like someone got in and just went haywire in there. That's potentially a company ending moment, if not at least a career ending moment for someone. Those are the most difficult. They require the most context. They require the biggest need to reduce access to them so that you're not always able to, it reduces the attack surface. That's where we try to frame people to start there. And then we look at, okay, can you reduce the number of roles and groups in the system? Can you reduce the amount of standing access? Can you be more responsive? Like the problem of if your CrowdStrike or your other security systems detect a problem with this user, can you react to that and can you pull them out of an environment? If the user's been no longer an employee, like they were terminated in the morning or they resigned in the morning, but they had an open session from the night before, are they still able to get access to things? Like, can you shut people off quickly in response to some type of HR event that goes on? So then those become wins for the business because the business recognizes this is a lot of risk, or if I've got a lot of groups, I've got to do access reviews in those groups. And if I've got 100,000 groups for 10,000 employees, that's a lot of work for people that's not really helping the business move forward. And so we can start to show value. It somewhat depends on who we're talking to. So if I'm talking to application owners, we might talk in terms of, I give you dynamic access to things rather than, I talk to an identity person, I might talk about zero standing access. Like people don't have access when they're not supposed to, but magically the access is there when they need to use it. The business likes to hear it the other way around. Like it'll be there when I want it and it's not there when I'm not looking. That's the right stance to be in. And that ultimately drives a better security posture. I'm talking to kind of the CISO persona. They tend to be the ones they start thinking about, what are my risk signals in the organization? How do I lower overall risk to things? And icing on the cake, can I make my business operational processes simpler too? Can I reduce access reviews? Can I reduce toil inside the company? Those are all wins for us.
Yeah, that's a great business story about reducing risk, reducing that kind of the overhead of things that help reduce the risk so that it makes it more effective. You actually started to steal from my next question, which was around what are the use cases, right? Because you painted a good picture there, especially, and it tied back to the continuous identity because you talked about, someone has been terminated from the system, but maybe they have a session open. I mean, literally, I've run into that before where it's like, well, yeah, we shut off their access, but if they still have their laptop and they're already logged in, we wouldn't know it. And I'm like, that's terrible. That is absolutely terrible. So this whole idea of, being able to go in and like surgically kill sessions. The one thing that you had mentioned earlier, because I asked a question about what are the sources of these signals, and then, obviously you link that to then we can take action. And the example used was the IDP. I'm wondering if you have any other examples, like are there examples about going into IGA systems or privileged access management or anything else that, maybe I didn't mention that just seems like, one you want to brag about a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. The IDP to cloud provider is probably our most popular use case. Closely related though, CI/CD pipelines. I've got my GitHub. If I can push code, I might as well have console access to the cloud. So protecting that, I can't push unless I meet policies. I have to be the release manager right now. I'm assigned to do that, and I'm on a patched device, and it doesn't have malware. All those things are important to me. That's another popular use case. I'd say the other ones, API gateways is a big one for us. So I'm making API calls. This really comes into play, and I know we haven't used the AI buzzword yet, but MCP or Model Context Protocol, that's just an API gateway pattern. Protecting that, we're getting a lot of interest in how do you put policy in place for that, especially because it's really easy to vibe code out one of these things without thinking about any kind of identity security practices, roll it out. And now I've done all kinds of egregious things like embedding tokens and not thinking about access control and not thinking about deployment, and no one knows about it. So this is just a sort of accident waiting to happen here. We got pits with spikes at the bottom of them in this area. Working with IGA and PAM, those are good ones too. So we've got some nice use cases with, say, SailPoint, where Maybe we want to do some of these checks against security systems when someone comes into SailPoint and requests access to something. SailPoint could call out to Signal, look for a policy. The Signal says, yeah, the person, Jeff looks good. He's, everything's fine with him. He's allowed to do this beyond just the normal rules. And then, or flip that around, something changes in a system and we could go say, hey, deprovision Jim, like go take him out of this Active Directory group because you've got that all wired up anyway as part of your joiner mover lever settings in SailPoint. Let's just trigger that. We see something anomalous. It comes in from the SOC. We can go tell SailPoint to do that. And that can speed things up too. That can make you more reactive and make your existing investments better. Do something similar with PAM. Like, hey, we know someone's compromised. We could tell it to rotate a credential, or we could even potentially block access to the PAM system itself for that user, so that they can't just go start doing exfil against all the passwords that are in the vault. So there's a lot that we can do in conjunction with those other systems. And these are all, we tend to see people and we encourage folks solve the easy problems first, like solve those and then expand, because the way the platform's built, it's meant to keep going to more use cases. And we just see customers follow that pattern. They start with one use case or two, we nail them, we roll it out, everyone's happy, we're all popping champagne, celebrating, and then, hey, the next use case, the next use case, the next use case, and so forth.
Well, we can pop some champagne in a little bit. I got a couple more questions for you. What is it that makes Signal different from your contemporaries in this space? Tell me what sets you apart, because this is my jaded CISO time where I say, okay, I already got a bunch of tools. Why do I need Signal, and why is it Signal over something else?
I'd say there's really not much out there that does this in the way we approach it. So there are other tools out there that understand CAPE signals and protocols. There's other tools that'll pull data in, like you could use Okta, and they have a directory system that they use provisioning. But these weren't they weren't designed to think about it from an enterprise-wide scale. They have kind of their corner and their main objective, and they tiptoe into these other areas. So all the IGA tools have some kind of PAM module that can do some privileged stuff. All the PAM tools out there have now acquired some IGA vendor, and they can do some simple IGA things. Okta just announced, I think, the other day that they've got, they made an acquisition in the space, and they've got some IGA and PAM things. So everyone's kind of tiptoeing around this like refactoring of the identity stack right now. We built this from day one to solve this type of problem. How do I stitch my entire stack together? Not just of identity data, operational data, and security data. Bring this all in one place and give you the ability to have this continuous identity architecture within the organization. That's what sets us apart, is we were purpose-built for this problem. We're not trying to retrofit this into an existing system. In some ways, it's kind of like the innovator's dilemma issue. Like, you have to reinvent your IGA stack to work in real time, or you'd have to reinvent your PAM system to understand workforce and single sign-on. None of these systems, they all kind of want to play in their own sandbox as if no one else exists. And I said, hey, this is one big sandbox. We all have to work in it. And maybe we should talk to the guys next door about those security stuff, because that seems kind of important to us.
Yeah, I can see definitely a lot of linkage with things like, a security operations center and some of the tools they have, right? Mm-hmm. It's all data you're trying to pull in. The more data that you've got, the more interesting and educated decisions you can make around how you want to leverage it, right?
Exactly.
So let's take a look at the broader industry at large here from an identity perspective. And I'm hoping I won't hear AI is the answer, although it probably is. What are some of the big trends that you see coming along that people should be keeping an eye out for? So I kind of call this like skating to where the puck is going to be, from an ice hockey analogy. What's coming up that that is really kind of piquing your interest? Or is it just, hey man, AI is here and we've really got to get that figured out?
I mean, definitely we'll take the AI one out of the way. Like, AI is here and we got to figure that out. I'm not smart enough to know all the impact it's going to have in the identity space. It's definitely having an impact and will continue to have one. Probably the only thing I won't be surprised by is that I'm going to be surprised about where we are in 12 months in the AI world. So putting that one to the side for the moment, the two big trends that I see here right now, one, we've been kind of dancing around it a little bit here, the convergence of identity and security together. And I actually think some drivers of this are, it's becoming pretty common for your CISO to start taking over your traditional CIO roles, or your CIO taking over CISO. Those two leaders are morphing into one leader. A lot of things that a CIO looked after before probably live under like a COO, like what productivity suite we're going to use. Are we going to be on Slack or Teams? Are we going to be on Zoom or Google Meet or Teams? Those decisions don't require a specialist as much. They require someone to negotiate price points on a per user per month pricing concept. So where does that leave the identity team? Because if you're thinking about identity systems, and traditionally, you guys know this probably better than I do, your IGA tools, your IDP tools kind of live in the IT world and kind of were more like productivity things. And your PAM tools, if they weren't in identity land, they were more in the security land. And as those worlds come together, it stops being about just productivity. It starts being more about, okay, yes, single sign-on gives me productivity and reduces passwords and I get MFA and all this goodness out of that. But I also start wanting to use this as security controls, which has historically been the CISO's world. So I think that's a massive trend right now, is just the convergence and mind meld of those two sort of organizations together into one. And I'd say it's probably not a surprise that of our customers who are moving the fastest, who are the furthest ahead here, and of the industry voices you hear, they probably work in an identity security team. And obviously, like you see, Palo Alto's acquisition of CyberArk, that happened a couple of weeks back. They're talking about that as identity security. So this is in the air. The other big trend I see is this generational change. It's been 25 years since we kind of came up with the IGA and PAM things. That is a long time. Like there's whole generations of humans who grew up after those events, right? After, the Enron events of the world that drove Sarbanes-Oxley. It's time to rethink how we do things. And so that's the other big trend I see, is we are coming up on massive replacement cycles of two entire sets of sort of the core identity stack. I'd say IDPs and passwordless are probably the latest generation, and even those are 15-year-old things. So it's natural that we're coming up on rethinking this.
Yeah, some of these solutions are now old enough to vote, maybe even drink in
the US. They're old enough to rent a car.
You've been so gracious with your time. I want to kind of pivot here to a little bit of a lighter note and kind of wrap the show up here. We were talking before we hit record, and you mentioned that you are into cooking, and I am into eating. So I think this is going to be a great conversation. So I would like to pose a hypothetical to you. So let's say you've got to create the perfect meal. And I'm going to put you on a spot here. Not only create the perfect meal, you have to create the perfect meal for me.
Okay.
What are you going to make? Why are you, and why are you making the decisions, for what you're going to make? And you can feel free to ask me questions if that helps you in any way.
Yeah. Let me ask a few, first off, anything you don't like eating, what's, any areas to avoid? Hey, I really hate, spicy food, or I don't eat fish, anything like that to be aware of?
Well, you hit two right there. So I'm not a fish person. I'm generally not a seafood person, with the exception of shrimp, as long as the heads are cut off. I don't dig on, the shrimp showing up with their heads on. No, give it to me.
What happened to sushi? I thought you liked sushi.
Sushi is the one exception. I will do something like tuna, maybe like a lighter fish, but it has to be with something else, like in a roll or something like that. Not spicy, although I can tolerate a little bit of pain. And then mushrooms are just not my jam at all. So other than that, I feel like I've got a pretty open palate now that I've cut off a third of the menu.
No. So so my thoughts are way out the window now. No, I'm just kidding. I'd say, let me think through this. If tuna's on the menu, I'd say a really nice piece of ahi tuna that's just really well seared, a little seasoning, a little salt, pepper, let the fish speak for itself. It'd probably be I'd anchor that around the main. Maybe a really good, I'm thinking Japanese would be a good venue to go down.
Mm-hmm.
Go with
gold
a
so
nice,
far, ahi tuna is
ahi
nice.
Tuna over some nice rice, just sliced up for you, nice presentation, maybe a little seaweed salad on the side. I'd probably think about a couple courses, make a really good miso soup to start with. I like roasting vegetables a lot, so I'd probably roast up some carrots, look for some, go see what's fresh, what's interesting, what's going to be colorful. Think about putting that together, and then maybe serving it out. I like to do more family style, like put things out on plates, share it around. I think that just makes for a better conversation. And it comes out nice because you use a big plate with lots of stuff on it. Always looks great. So that's probably the direction I would take it in.
Okay, so Erik, what time do I show up for this? Because you absolutely nailed that. Like, that is totally my jam. I am totally on top of that. So I'm going to invite myself over for dinner at some point, or maybe we'll just go out and get a nice sushi dinner somewhere.
Whenever you want. Happy to cook for the both of you. Next time you're up in the Bay Area, we'll make it a date.
Jim, how about yourself? Like, how does that strike you of like a dinner, like the ahi tuna?
Sounds awesome. Yeah, I'm pretty open-minded. The only thing I don't like is really strong cheese, like blue cheese. I don't like feta. It's just the smell turns me off, and I've always been that way. But other than that, I mean, I'm pretty open. I mean, I'll even eat like really strong meats, like organ meat, like liver and stuff like that. So yeah, and wild game, like I know a lot of people don't like that. I think it's interesting. So yeah, I'm pretty much up for anything, but if you put blue cheese on it, I might just leave.
Yeah, I'll leave the blue cheese off the nice piece of ahi. So
there you go. That sounds good.
I totally appreciate that, because blue cheese is one of the things I absolutely detest, because I spent the better part of probably 7 or 8 years bartending. And one of the things that we had to do was stuffed blue cheese olives for our martinis. Yeah. And so if I never see blue cheese again, I will be totally fine with that.
I'll be the contrary and say I like blue cheese. I love a good piece of feta, but I will probably eat most anything. Early in my career, I spent a year in Hong Kong working on a project. And before that, I didn't eat as much seafood. I didn't like eggs too much. And I just went in with the mentality, like, this is a totally new cuisine. There's influences from all over Asia here. I'm just going to eat whatever. So if it didn't crawl off my plate, I'd eat it. And so now I'm this has been a while now. It's been 20 plus years since I was there, but it's definitely opened my palate quite a bit.
I was not always an adventurous eater. I would say I'm starting to put my toe in the water. I was very much like a grilled cheese and, chicken nuggets growing up. But as I've gotten older, that I have been more willing to try things. So I will try just about anything once, just so I know that I'm like
Daniel. I mean, you either get experimental or you don't eat.
I will give a lot of credit to Daniel. So, our boss here at RSM, but he has definitely taken me on some excursions, and I'm very grateful for that, because I have tried things that I would normally not have eaten, and I've enjoyed some of it. I won't say all of it. I have enjoyed some of it.
I liked a lot of things. I wasn't big on bone marrow. But I mean, at the same time, I could eat it again. Just wasn't my favorite.
Yeah, I hear you. Yep. I think it's important to try it once, see if you like it. You never know. You'd be surprised.
Yeah, that's how you discover, hey, new things. It's kind of like
exactly
music, right? It's like, oh, I didn't discover the Beatles until I was 30, or I didn't discover Metallica until I discovered them early, but you get my drift.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Erik, you've been great, and really appreciate you taking some time with us. Thank you again for sponsoring an episode here with us. I'm going to have links in our show notes here for people to reach out to you on LinkedIn. Maybe, share recipes or other things, whether it's recipes for, identity data or other food items. Let's see what else. Visit the website, sgnl.ai/IDAC. There'll be some information there that people can kind of check out. And that also shows support for the show that, hey, you heard it here on Identity at the Center. So with that, we're going to go ahead and leave it for this week. Thanks, everyone, for watching and or listening. And we'll talk with y'all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.